Hello. Okay, so this is a continuation of Chapter 3. This is Chapter 3, Part 2, and we are talking about how kids feel about their parents. And right before I stopped the video in the first lecture, we were talking about how young kids view their parents very highly, and then right around the teenage years, parents' influence begins to subside a little bit. In those early teen years, so say 9 to 11 years old, well over close to 60% of all kids want to be like their parents. After that, the 12 to 14-year-olds, it drops significantly. Only 26% of kids want to be like their parents. So a significant decline in how they view parents. And I'm sure if you're a parent, you understand this very well. And this also is a time when the rise of the peer group and social pressure and social media really take hold of kids. Although there is a really interesting dichotomy that appears with teenage children at this age, and that is that even though teenage kids don't want to be like their parents, well over close to 60% of them want to spend more time with their parents. So this is really a time of for kids and parents and families when things can get a bit rough. If you have teenagers, you probably know that. But children, on the one hand, want their independence, they want their autonomy, they want to be very different from their parents. And on the other hand, they really still want and need their parents' approval. And even though they might rail against it, they want to spend time with their parents. That's very important to them. So even though during this time period it seems like your teen is pushing away, not wanting to spend time with you, this is the time when they really need parental attention, influence, time. One of the barriers that families find to spending time together is the lack of time itself. As we see an increase in single-parent households and two-income families, finding that time to spend together can become increasingly challenging. As families have evolved and changed and morphed over the years, one thing we do see is that now increasingly fathers are spending more time with their children, which is a real positive thing. In past years, fathers generally did not spend a lot of time with their kids. They were busy working, and the mothers were at home in that typical traditional two-parent, one-income household. That really is a thing of the past, which in many ways is good to bring fathers more actively into the parent-rearing capacity. Interestingly enough, though, this increase in father time with kids is not present with Black families. Roughly 76% of Black youth say they spend more time with their mothers. Now, what would be really interesting to look into is whether that is influenced by the amount of African American males that are incarcerated. And that's another discussion for another time, but the African American males are overrepresented within the penal system. They make up by far a greater percentage of inmates than their percentage of the overall population would indicate. So, for example, 12 to 13% of the U.S. population is comprised of African Americans, but African Americans make up well over 60% of the incarcerated population. That is, those statistics don't line up. So when we see something like that within research or statistics, we can't jump to any conclusions and say, aha, I know why that is happening. But it should raise questions in our mind, and it should encourage us to delve deeper and do some more research to find out, what is happening with that statistic. So today, with the rise of technology and everybody has an iPhone and video games and, what have you, it can be easy to say that technology is changing society and technology is exerting more influence on the growth and development of our kids than families are. But honestly, it still goes back to the family being the single most important element in a child's growth and development. So we talked about the graying of society. We talked about how This tends to happen more quickly in wealthier nations and nations that have older, more mature economies. We talked about the reason for that is because the fertility rate decreases. That isn't because all of a sudden women become infertile, but we talked about how when you are a wealthier nation, you have more education, women are far more likely to go to school, higher education. Today, there are more women in college than there are males. So all that puts a downward pull on the number of children that families tend to have, which means that there are less babies being born. So that younger generation coming up is not the same size as the generation that's getting older, thus the graying of society. One of the often unconsidered factors of the graying of the population is that that means we have more seniors driving. And by I believe this year, there are approximately 30 million drivers that are 70 years or older on the roads. And granted, 70 is the new 50, but still, you know, the elder population of drivers is definitely increasing. Let's see. We are expected to soon have more traffic accidents and traffic deaths caused by elder motorists than we do caused by drunk drivers, which is quite a significant statistic. Frequently, it's up to the kids to have that difficult conversation with the parents as to when it is time to perhaps stop driving. I know we had to do this with my father-in-law, and it was a real difficulty for him because driving really does mean independence. And if you can drive, you can get around, you can go where you want to go. If you are no longer able to drive, it really makes you more dependent on others. The one bright spot in all of this is I see self-driving cars coming very soon, which might make things a lot easier for those 70 plus drivers. Now, with the increase of technology, you all have heard of, and I'm sure referenced, the hazards of the internet and the scams that can be perpetrated via the internet and the phishing issues. I still can't believe some of the phishing emails that go around companies and that people actually open them and are sucked into these incredible scams. And it's ubiquitous. They're all over. And you know, as you have seen, if you have a young person in your home, you can marvel, many people marvel at how adept kids are with technology and how easily they seem to adapt to it and how it comes so naturally to them and how the elderly generations have to struggle a little more to become comfortable with technology. Well, that's for the very simple reason that kids have grown up with it. It's not anything new or different that they have to learn. This has been a part of their lives from when they were very young. I mean, I see 2- and 3-year-olds using their fingers to swipe on a pad, and you know, it's part of their lives. So hopefully the younger generations, is what I'm getting at, will not be as susceptible to some of the scams as some of the elderly generations. And this does not mean that all elder scams come via the internet. That is not true. But what I am wanting to mention is that elder abuse through manipulation and scamming and what have you is really prevalent. And unfortunately, there are people that focus on targeting the elderly for scams. One of the things that happens as we age, one of the physiological things that happens, hopefully slowly in most people, but in everyone it does seem to happen, is that your cognitive facilities tend to start slowing down. And that's just a natural part of aging. And as people get older, they become more susceptible to abuse. And so that's something that we really have to be on the lookout for and safeguard against. One of the tricks that telemarketers use is they do many different things, but one of the things they will do is if you have number recognition on your phone. A lot of telemarketers will get numbers that are local numbers and dial people from that. So they think, oh, okay, this is someone that I may know, so I'm going to answer the call. Or telemarketers will call from out of state. Telemarketers scam people because it is more difficult to prosecute from a different state, and that way they can, go after their victims a little easier. Finally, it is hard to prosecute these cases. One of the reasons being is often it's one person's word against another, and they do become very, very difficult to prosecute. And finally, part of the gullibility that we see with our elder generation and being susceptible to scams is that generation really was raised during an era of polite manners, and it wasn't, number one, it wasn't polite not to listen to someone, and it wasn't polite to not answer a phone call or hang up on a caller, or any number of things that fit into that elder culture that make it easier for them to be susceptible to scams. Okay, well, that wraps up chapter 3. Hopefully this has given you some good insights. Don't hesitate to let me know if you have any questions. Chapter 4 is coming. All right, thanks so much. Bye-bye.